The sun beat down mercilessly on the outskirts of Copper Springs, where 9-year-old Pia Wilson discovered what no child should ever see. Behind the abandoned stagecoach station lay a mountain of a man, a mighty Apache warrior, skin blistered from exposure, wrists raw from iron shackles. Most children would have run. Pia didn't. With a tin cup of water and courage beyond her years, she knelt beside Stephen, a warrior once feared throughout the territory. His eyes, though clouded with pain, held something unexpected, not hatred, but a flicker of recognition, as if seeing something long forgotten. For 3 days, she returned in secret, bringing food, water, and whispered stories. When Sheriff Blackwood finally discovered them together, the town erupted into chaos. Was this Apache a murderer, a victim, or something else entirely? Would this unusual friendship heal ancient wounds or tear the town apart forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Copper Springs had seen better days. Once bustling with the promise of mineral wealth, the town now clung to existence like a stubborn weed in cracked earth. Wooden buildings lined the main street, their paint blistered and peeling under the relentless Arizona sun. A weathered sign swung above the general store, the carved letters of Reed's Mercantile, barely legible after 30 years of dust storms and summer heat. In the modest White House at the edge of town, Dr. Thomas Wilson adjusted his spectacles and peered at his daughter's empty bed. Pia's absence at breakfast wasn't unusual. The child rose with the sun and moved with the curious energy that both delighted and exhausted him. Since Margaret's passing 3 winters ago, raising Pia alone had been his greatest challenge and his saving grace. "Pia," he called, his voice carrying through the open window into the yard. No answer came. Only the distant barking of Simmons' hound and the creak of the windmill behind the house. Dr. Wilson sighed, gathering his medical bag. Miss Abernethy's rheumatism wouldn't wait, and Sheriff Blackwood had mentioned stopping by about those headaches. Pia would appear when hunger drove her home, sunburned and full of stories about lizards or unusual rocks she'd discovered. Across town, Samuel Reed arranged tobacco tins behind the counter, his gnarled fingers moving with practiced precision. At 72, Samuel had seen the town rise and fall, watched hatred bloom and wither, buried friends on both sides of conflicts best forgot. The bell above his door jingled. "Morning, Samuel," Sheriff Blackwood nodded, settling his considerable frame against the counter. "Quiet night, quiet as a church mouse," Samuel replied, reaching for the coffee pot. Though Peterson's boy claims he saw Apache smoke signals on the eastern ridge, the sheriff accepted the steaming cup. "That boy sees ghosts in his outhouse." His weathered face grew serious. "Still, the Jenkins Ranch reported missing cattle, 3rd time this month." Samuel's eyes, still sharp beneath bushy white brows, studied the sheriff. "Blaming the Apache is easier than admitting rustlers might be white men from our own town." "Careful, old man," Blackwood warned without malice. "Mayor Hollingsworth hears talk like that. He'll have you labeled an Indian lover faster than you can spit." "At my age, there are worse things to be called," Samuel chuckled. Outside, the stagecoach rattled into town 2 days late, carrying mail, supplies, and Mrs. Abernathy's niece from Boston. Mayor Hollingsworth, dressed too finely for the dusty street, emerged from his office to greet the newcomers personally. His eyes lingered on the leather pouches that might contain responses to his letters about the railroad spur, letters that could determine Copper Springs' future. In the schoolhouse, empty for summer, Mrs. Eleanor Abernathy traced her fingers over the spines of books she'd ordered months ago. 40 years in Copper Springs, and still she maintained standards from her Boston upbringing. The children would learn properly regardless of their circumstances. Her hand paused at her collar, touching the small silver cross hidden beneath a reminder of debts unpaid and secrets kept. Pia Wilson, meanwhile, had slipped through the gap in the fence behind Peterson's farm, taking the shortcut to her favorite place. The abandoned stagecoach station had stood empty for 8 years, since the new route bypassed Copper Springs. To 9-year-old Pia, it was a castle, A fort, a place of infinite possibilities, where she could escape the pitying glances of townspeople who saw only a motherless child. Her father didn't know she came here. He'd forbidden it after the roof partially collapsed last spring. But Pia had discovered which beams to avoid and where the floor remained solid. Besides, she'd promised her ragdoll Emily that they'd finish exploring the old storage room today. The station sat on a low hill, offering views across the scrubland to the distant mountains, Apache territory, the adults called it, their voices always dropping to whispers. Pia had never seen an Apache, though she'd heard endless stories about their savagery and stealth. As she approached the weather-beaten building, something felt different. The air seemed charged, like before a storm. Emily clutched tight in one hand. Pia hesitated at the door that hung crooked on rusted hinges. A sound came from inside, not the usual scurrying of mice or the settling of old timber, but something labored and heavy, like breathing. Pia froze, her heart fluttering like a trapped bird. Common sense said run. Curiosity whispered, look. In her pocket, her fingers closed around the smooth stone her father had given her for her birthday. A piece of Apache land, he'd said, from the days before trouble came. The stone felt warm against her palm, as if offering courage. Swallowing hard, Pia Wilson pushed open the door and stepped into the shadows, unaware that this ordinary Tuesday would reshape not only her life, but the future of Copper Springs itself. The interior of the stagecoach station was cool and dim after the glare outside. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that speared through gaps in the roof. Pia stood perfectly still, allowing her eyes to adjust, clutching Emily the ragdoll tighter against her chest. The sound came again, a ragged breath followed by the faint clink of metal against wood. It emanated from the back room where the stage company had once stored mail and valuables. "Hello?" Pia whispered, her voice small in the cavernous space. No response came, but the breathing hitched slightly. Something inside her, the same instinct that could sense approaching storms or when her father was sad, but trying to hide it, told her that whatever waited in that room was hurt, not hunting. Gathering her courage, she crept forward. The door to the back room hung askew, offering a narrow gap. Pia peered through, then stumbled back with a gasp. A giant of a man lay slumped against the far wall. No, not just a man, an Apache warrior. Even in the dim light, she could see the intricate patterns shaved into his hair. The copper skin stretched tight over high cheekbones. His massive frame seemed impossibly large in the confined space, though he had curled slightly inward like a wounded animal. Dried blood crusted along a gash on his forehead. His wrists were bound with iron shackles, the skin beneath raw and weeping. A chain snaked from the manacles to a heavy bolt in the wall. The warrior's eyes opened, obsidian black and fever bright. They fixed on Pia with the intensity of a hawk. She should have screamed, should have run. Instead, she stood transfixed, as something unexpected passed between them. Not menace, but recognition, as though he'd been waiting. His cracked lips moved, forming words she couldn't hear. Despite her fear, Pia edged closer. "Water," he rasped, the English word heavy with accent, but clear enough. Without conscious thought, Pia reached for the tin cup she'd brought for her adventures, attached to her belt by a piece of twine. Outside, a rainwater barrel collected what little moisture fell from Arizona skies. She slipped out, filled the cup, and returned before she could reconsider. The warrior's hands shook as he reached for the cup, chains rattling with the effort. Pia approached cautiously, extending the water at arm's length. Their fingers brushed as he took it, his burning with fever, hers cool and small. He drained the cup in 3 desperate swallows, water dribbling down his chin into the intricate tattoo that covered his chest. A thunderbird, its wings spread from shoulder to shoulder. "Thank you, little one," he said, each word seeming to cost him effort. Pia found her voice at last. "Who put you here?" A bitter smile touched his lips. "Men who fear what they do not understand." "You're hurt," she stated simply. "Yes. I'll get my father. He's a doctor." Alarm flashed across the warrior's face. "No, The sudden force of his voice made her jump. More gently, he added, "No white men. They will kill me before asking why I am here." Pia's brow furrowed. "But you're dying. Perhaps that is the way of things." Something stubborn kindled in Pia's chest. "No, that's not right." She studied him with the directness only children can manage. "What's your name?" The question seemed to surprise him. After a long moment he answered, "The army men called me Stephen. My people call me Nantan Taz. It means strong chief. I'm Pia Wilson." He nodded, as if committing this to memory. "You should go, Pia Wilson. Forget what you have seen. I'll come back," she declared with childish certainty. "I can bring food and medicine from my father's supplies. You won't notice if I'm careful." Stephen's eyes closed briefly, whether from pain or resignation wasn't clear. "Why would you help me, child?" Pia considered this, head tilted. "Because you're hurt and alone." And she hesitated, fingering the smooth stone in her pocket. "Because you have kind eyes." A strange sound emerged from the warrior's throat, something between a laugh and a groan. "You see things others do not, little one." Behind them, the old building creaked in the rising wind. Pia glanced nervously toward the door, suddenly aware of how long she'd been gone. "I have to go home now, or my father will worry. But I'll return tomorrow." Stephen nodded, his strength visibly fading. "If I am still here, little brave one." As Pia turned to leave, she noticed something half buried in the dirt floor near his foot. A small wooden carving of an eagle, intricate despite its simplicity. It must have fallen from his possession. "Your eagle," she said, pointing. Stephen's gaze followed her finger. "Take it," he murmured. "A guardian for your journey." Hesitantly, Pia picked up the carving, feeling its smoothness against her palm. "I'll bring it back tomorrow, with food." "Tomorrow," he echoed, the word somewhere between acknowledgement and disbelief. The last thing Pia saw as she slipped away was the warrior's face, proud even in suffering, watching her with eyes that held too many stories for her young mind to comprehend. Dawn had barely broken when Pia slipped from her bed, careful not to let the floorboards creak beneath her bare feet. She'd spent the night planning her mission, the wooden eagle clutched in her palm like a talisman. Now she moved with purpose through the quiet house. In the kitchen, she wrapped cornbread and dried beef in a clean cloth. From the medicine cabinet, usually locked but carelessly left open last night, when her father returned exhausted from delivering the Sanderson baby, she pilfered bandages, iodine and a small tin of healing salve. "What are you doing, young lady?" Her father's voice nearly made her drop everything. Pia whirled, hiding her bounty behind her back, making a picnic she improvised, for exploring. Dr. Wilson rubbed sleep from his eyes, his suspicion softened by the early hour. "It's barely sunrise. Best time to see rabbits," she replied with rehearsed casualness. He studied her a moment longer, then sighed. "Be home by noon and stay away from the old stagecoach station." "I know, Papa." The lie tasted strange on her tongue. She'd never deceived her father before. "That roof could collapse any moment," he reminded her, already turning toward his coffee. 20 minutes later, Pia approached the station, supplies hidden in a flour sack. She paused at the entrance, suddenly unsure if yesterday had been real or imagined. "Stephen," she called softly, pushing open the creaking door. For a terrible moment, silence answered her. Then came the now familiar rattle of chains. "Little brave one," the deep voice acknowledged. "You returned." He looked worse than yesterday, fever flushing his copper skin. The Thunderbird tattoo seemed to pulse with each labored breath. Yet his eyes remained clear, watching her with something between wonder and weariness. "I brought things," she said, kneeling beside him and unpacking her treasures. "Food, water, medicine." Stephen observed as she laid each item on the dusty floor, his expression unreadable. "Why do you help me?" he asked again, as if her answer might have changed overnight. Pia frowned, considering. "Would you rather I didn't?" A ghost of a smile touched his lip. "I have known few white people who offer kindness without expecting something in return." "What would I expect?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. "Perhaps that is the wisdom of children," he murmured. You have not yet learned to hate what is different. Pia soaked a cloth in water and approached him cautiously. This might sting, she warned, reaching for the cut on his forehead. Stephen remained perfectly still as she cleaned his wounds, only the tightening around his eyes betraying his pain. His wrists were worst. The shackles had cut deep, and infection threatened. Pia applied the salve as she'd seen her father do for miners with injured hands. You have a healer's touch, Stephen observed. My father's the healer. I just watch. Watching and learning the way of the wise. As Pia worked, Stephen's gaze drifted to the wooden eagle she'd set aside. You brought it back. It's yours, she said simply. It was carved by my father's father. His voice softened with memory. The eagle sees far, protects its young fiercely, fears nothing that flies. Pia finished bandaging his wrists as best she could without removing the shackles. How did you get here? Who chained you? Stephen was silent, so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he spoke, each word measured. I discovered something dangerous. Men who wished to silence me left me here to die where none would find me. What men? What did you discover? Some stories are not for children's ears, little one. Frustration creased her brow. I'm helping you. I deserve to know. Yes, he agreed unexpectedly. You do, but knowledge can be dangerous. I'm not afraid. That, he said softly, is what concerns me. As Stephen ate the cornbread with slow, deliberate movements, Pia studied the chains. The padlock seemed impossibly large, the keyhole a tiny dark eye mocking her efforts. Can't we break them? She asked. Stephen shook his head. Army steel. It would take tools we don't have. A sudden thought struck her. I could bring my father's hacksaw and explain how it became bloodied and bent. Stephen shook his head again. No, for now we wait. For what? For what the spirits will bring. He closed his eyes briefly. Tell me about yourself, Pia Wilson. Who teaches you? What games do you play? The shift surprised her, but she found herself talking about Mrs. Abernethy's strict lessons, about the china doll she'd never played with because it was her mother's, about Samuel Reed sneaking her peppermint sticks when her father wasn't looking. As she chattered, Stephen's eyes grew heavy. The food and water and human connection seemed to have granted him permission to finally rest. I must go, she whispered eventually. But I'll come back this evening. His eyes opened slightly. Bring nothing more. You risk too much already. Just water then, she compromised, gathering the bloodied cloths to dispose of where they wouldn't be found. As she reached the door, Stephen called softly, Pia Wilson. She turned. The eagle watches over you now, he said, his voice fading as sleep claimed him. Your spirit is known to him. Clutching the wooden carving that now seemed impossibly precious, Pia slipped back into the morning light, her heart both lighter and heavier than it had been yesterday. 3 days passed in a pattern of secret visits. Morning, noon, and evening, Pia would find reasons to slip away from town. Dr. Wilson, preoccupied with a sudden outbreak of summer fever among the miners, barely noticed her absences. When he did ask, she had excuses prepared, collecting interesting rocks, watching birds build nests, helping Mrs. Abernathy organize books at the schoolhouse. The lies weighed on her, but each time she entered the abandoned station and saw Stephen's condition improving, her resolve strengthened. On the 4th morning she arrived to find him sitting upright against the wall, eyes clear of fever for the first time. The chains remained, but he held himself differently, less like a prisoner, more like a chief temporarily inconvenienced. Your medicine works, little healer, he greeted her. The nickname made her smile. She set down her bundle today. She'd brought a small loaf of freshly baked bread and 2 apples she'd picked from the tree behind the church when no one was looking. You look better, she observed, noting the improved color in his face. My people heal quickly when properly tended. He inclined his head in gratitude. And when we have reason to live, Pia settled cross-legged before him, curiosity burning. Each day, she'd asked questions. Each day, he'd answered a few more, as if testing how much he could trust her. You promised to tell me about the Apache ceremonies, she reminded him. Stephen's eyes crinkled slightly. So I did. He shifted, chains clinking, as he made himself more comfortable. Among my people, the most sacred ceremony is the sunrise dance, when a girl becomes a woman, like a birthday celebration. More important, it means she can now bring new life into the tribe. For 4 days, she dances from sunrise to sunset, showing her strength to the spirits. Pia tried to imagine dancing all day under the Arizona sun. That sounds hard. It is meant to be. Life is hard. But the tribe helps her, singing, praying, celebrating her journey. His deep voice took on a rhythmic quality as he described the songs, the special buckskin dress, the blessing of corn pollen. "Do boys have a ceremony too?" she asked. "Yes, but different. A boy must prove himself as a hunter, a protector. He goes alone into the wilderness with only a knife. When he returns with his first deer, the men welcome him to their circle." "Did you do that?" A shadow crossed his face. "I was 12 summers. The deer I tracked was larger than any taken that season." Pia leaned forward eagerly. "What happened?" "I followed it for 2 days without rest. When I finally made my kill, I thanked the deer's spirit for its sacrifice, as is our way." His hands moved in remembered gestures despite the chains. "I returned carrying the meat and hide myself, though it nearly broke my back." Pride tinged his voice, and Pia found herself smiling. "My father, Stephen," halted abruptly. "What about him?" After a pause, Stephen continued more softly. "My father placed the warrior's headband on me himself. He was a great chief, respected by all Apache bands. Is he still alive?" "No, he died defending our hunting grounds from soldiers when I was 16. The familiar guilt of her people's actions touched Pia. "I'm sorry, it was long ago." A silence fell between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken histories. Pia broke off a piece of bread and handed it to him. "Mrs. Abernathy says Apache people worship idols." Stephen's expression hardened briefly. "Mrs. Abernathy is mistaken. We honor Usan, the creator of all things. We see his power in the mountains, the rivers, the sky, not in carved figures." He studied her. "Does that surprise you?" "A little," she admitted. She also said Apache warriors are bloodthirsty and scalp their enemies. A strange sound rumbled from Stephen's chest, a laugh, she realized with surprise. "Some did, yes, mostly to Apache. Scalping was brought by white soldiers and Mexican fighters who collected bounties for our hair." His eyes grew distant. "War makes monsters of many men, regardless of their skin color." Did you? Pia struggled to form the question. "Was I a monster?" he finished gently. "I fought to protect my people, little one. I killed men who came to kill me. But I never took pleasure in death." Pia considered this with the straightforward moral reasoning of childhood. "That seems fair." Stephen's expression softened. "The world is rarely fair, but there is justice in the balance of things." He reached slowly into the ragged remains of his leather vest and withdrew something wrapped in a scrap of buckskin. "I have been thinking of how to thank you." Carefully, he unwrapped the bundle to reveal a small bone whistle, polished smooth and etched with simple designs. "This is a healing whistle," he explained, "made from the wing bone of an eagle that saved my life when I was lost as a child. The sound it makes calls to the spirits of protection." He held it out, the chains on his wrists jingling softly. "I can't take that," Pia protested. "It's too important, which is why it is a worthy gift for one who saved my life." His eyes held hers with gentle insistence. "Among my people, balance must be maintained. You gave life, I give protection." Hesitantly, she accepted the whistle. It felt warm against her palm, as if still containing some essence of the eagle it came from. "How do I play it?" "Like this." He demonstrated the proper position with his own fingers. "But use it only in true need. The spirits listen, but they do not like to be disturbed for small matters." As Pia tried a soft experimental breath into the whistle, a clear, haunting note emerged, higher and purer than she expected. Outside, a flock of birds took sudden flight from a nearby tree. Stephen nodded in satisfaction. "The spirits hear you, Pia Wilson. Remember this day. The morning air carried an unusual crispness as Sheriff Blackwood made his rounds earlier than usual. Something had been nagging at him for days, little things that didn't quite fit, supplies missing from the general store that Samuel couldn't account for. Dr. Wilson mentioning his medicine cabinet being disturbed, Pia Wilson's sudden interest in taking long walks alone, when before she'd been the type to chatter about her adventures to anyone who'd listen. Small things, but in 30 years of wearing the badge, Blackwood had learned that small things often pointed to larger troubles. He paused outside Reed's Mercantile, watching Pia hurry past with a suspicious-looking bundle clutched to her chest. The girl glanced over her shoulder twice before disappearing down the path that led, if his memory served correctly, toward the old stagecoach station. The very station Dr. Wilson had explicitly forbidden her to visit because of the dangerous roof. Blackwood sighed, adjusted his gun belt, and followed at a discreet distance. Probably nothing, just a child with an imagination seeking adventure. But these days, with tensions rising after the incident at the Jenkins Ranch, he couldn't be too careful. The path wound through scrubby brush before opening to the low hill where the station stood. Blackwood hung back, watching as Pia approached the building with purpose rather than childish excitement. She moved like someone with a mission, checking her surroundings before slipping inside. Curious now, he waited several minutes before approaching. As he neared the weather-beaten structure, he heard something unexpected: voices. Not just Pia's high, clear tones, but a man's voice, deep and measured, with the faintest accent he couldn't immediately place. His hand moved instinctively to his revolver as he edged closer to a broken window. And then the coyote realized he had been tricked, the man's voice was saying. The rabbit had led him in circles back to his own den. Pia's delighted laugh followed. Coyote doesn't sound very smart. In our stories, Coyote is clever, but foolish. He teaches us by showing what not to do. Blackwood froze. Our stories. The accent clicked into place. Apache. There was an Apache man in there with Pia Wilson. In one fluid motion born of decades of experience, Blackwood drew his revolver and kicked open the door, positioning himself in the entrance with weapon raised. "Don't move," he commanded. The tableau before him seared into his memory. Pia seated cross-legged on the floor, face alight with excitement that transformed to shock at his entrance. Across from her, a massive Apache warrior, bare-chested and powerful despite the chains that bound him to the wall. Between them lay the remnants of a meal: bread, dried meat, a canteen of water. "Sheriff," Pia scrambled to her feet. "Don't shoot him. Step away from him, Pia. Now." Blackwood kept his revolver trained on the Apache, who had not moved except to straighten his posture, eyes calmly assessing the threat. "He won't hurt me," Pia protested, but she backed away as instructed. "What in God's name is going on here?" Blackwood demanded, gaze flicking between them. "Who is this man?" "His name is Stephen. I found him hurt and chained up. I've been helping him." "Helping up?" Blackwood bit off the word, eyes narrowing at the warrior. "Who are you really? What were you doing with this child?" The Apache met his gaze steadily. "I am called Nanton Taza by my people. The army knew me as Scout Stephen." His deep voice carried no fear, only dignity. "The child found me abandoned to die. She brought water, food, medicine." An Apache scout. Blackwood's surprise momentarily overrode his caution. The army's Apache scouts were legendary, natives who worked with soldiers, mostly tracking hostile bands. They were both respected and reviled, depending on who you asked. "Why are you chained here? Who did this?" "Men who fear what I know." "That's not an answer." "It is the only one I can give, until I know where you stand, Sheriff." The warrior's perceptive gaze seemed to look straight through Blackwood. "Will you shoot an unarmed prisoner, or hear a truth that may cost us both?" A tense silence stretched between them. Blackwood had faced down gunmen, broken up mining riots, and once stared down a grizzly at 20 paces. But something in this man's calm assessment made him lower his revolver slightly. "Pia," Wait outside, but Sheriff, now young lady. Reluctantly, Pia moved toward the door, pausing beside the sheriff. Please don't hurt him, she whispered. He's my friend. Once she was gone, Blackwood approached cautiously, keeping his weapon ready. Start talking, and make it convincing. The warrior Stephen nodded once. I served the army for 8 years, tracked renegade bands, helped negotiate peace. 3 weeks ago, I discovered documents in Major Harrington's tent, plans to seize land, both Apache territory and settler properties around Copper Springs. What kind of plans? Maps marked with false boundaries, orders to provoke attacks, then use them as excuse for seizure. Stephen's voice remained even. The papers implicated men in your town. When I confronted the major, I was beaten, chained, brought here to die where none would find me. Convenient that there's no way to verify this story, Blackwood said skeptically. The papers still exist. I hid them before they took me. Blackwood studied the warrior's face, looking for signs of deception. 20 years as sheriff had made him a good judge of men, regardless of their skin color. The steady gaze, the calm demeanor even in chains, either this man was telling the truth or he was the best liar Blackwood had ever encountered. Who in Copper Springs is involved? I saw one name clearly, Hollingsworth. The mayor. Blackwood felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Hollingsworth had been pushing hard for the railroad spur, buying up land at suspicious rates. If this Apache was telling the truth, I need to think, Blackwood said finally, holstering his weapon. Either way, I can't leave you here with access to a child. I understand. I'm taking you to the jail. If your story checks out, we'll figure something out. If not, he left the sentence unfinished. Stephen nodded, accepting the implied threat with dignity. The child has a pure heart. Whatever you believe of me, she acted with compassion. Blackwood retrieved the keys to the shackles from his pocket, standard army issue that matched his own jail keys. As he unlocked the chains from the wall and left them on the Apache's wrists, he made a decision he hoped he wouldn't regret. Pia, he called. She appeared instantly, hovering anxiously in the doorway. Her eyes widened at the sight of Stephen standing at his full height for the first time, towering even over Blackwood's 6-foot frame. We're taking your friend to town, Blackwood said carefully. This stays between us until I figure out what's what. Understand? Pia nodded solemnly, her hand slipping unconsciously to her pocket, where Blackwood glimpsed something small and white, a whistle of some kind. Lead the way, young lady, and heaven help us all when your father finds out. The old church bell rang out across Copper Springs, its urgent peals drawing townsfolk from their homes and businesses. It hadn't been used as an alarm since the flash flood 3 springs ago, and its sonorous voice carried authority no human shout could match. By the time Sheriff Blackwood marched his prisoner down Main Street, a crowd had already gathered outside the jailhouse. Stephen walked with his head high despite the chains, his massive frame dwarfing even the sheriff. Behind them came Pia, chin jutting defiantly though her eyes betrayed uncertainty. Sweet merciful heaven, someone gasped. It's an Apache. What's he doing with the Wilson girl? Is that blood on his chest? The whispers surged like wind through dry grass. Sheriff Blackwood raised a hand for silence as they reached the jailhouse steps. Town meeting in 30 minutes, he announced, voice carrying over the murmurs. Bring the mayor. Dr. Thomas Wilson pushed through the crowd, face ashen. Pia, when he saw her trailing behind the Apache prisoner, he lunged forward only to be blocked by Blackwood's outstretched arm. She's fine, Thomas. Let me get him secured, then we'll talk. What is going on? Dr. Wilson demanded, eyes darting between his daughter and the imposing warrior. Pia, come here this instant. Pia hesitated, looking up at Stephen with obvious concern. Go to your father, little healer, Stephen said softly. All will be well. The tenderness in the Apache's voice toward his daughter struck Dr. Wilson silent. He watched, bewildered, as Pia squeezed Stephen's hand briefly before running to his side. Inside the jailhouse, Blackwood secured Stephen in the larger of the 2 cells, removing the army shackles and replacing them with his own manacles attached to the wall. Secure but less cruelly tight. Water, he offered, sliding a tin cup through the bars. Stephen accepted with a nod of thanks. The child will face trouble for helping me. That's putting it mildly. Blackwood studied his prisoner. Any other parts of your story you want to clarify before I face that mob? Only this, Stephen said, lowering his voice. The maps I found marked both Apache land and the North Ridge, where many of your people have farms. The seizure would displace your people too. Why would Hollingsworth support that? He owns half the businesses in town, because he also owns stock in Arizona Western Railroad. The planned route cuts through those properties. Blackwood absorbed this, jaw tightening. We'll continue this discussion later. Outside, the crowd had swelled. Mayor Hollingsworth arrived, silk vest gleaming in the midday sun. His usual jovial expression hardened when he saw Blackwood. What's this about an Apache, Sheriff? And why are you calling a town meeting without consulting me? Special circumstances, Mayor. You'll want to hear this alongside everyone else. The town hall couldn't accommodate everyone, so they gathered in the open area beside it. Crates and barrels were dragged out for makeshift seating. Dr. Wilson sat stiffly with Pia beside him, her small hand engulfed in his larger one. Samuel Reed took position near the back, observing quietly. Mrs. Abernathy arrived last, her face tightening when she heard whispers about the Apache prisoner. Mayor Hollingsworth stood on the porch steps, assuming authority. Now then, what's this all about, Sheriff? Blackwood stepped forward. This morning I discovered Pia Wilson had been secretly helping an injured Apache warrior who'd been chained and abandoned in the old stagecoach station. Gasps and exclamations rippled through the crowd. The prisoner identifies himself as Nantan Taza, known to the U.S. Army as Scout Stephen. He claims he was left to die after discovering evidence of a land seizure scheme involving both Apache territory and properties belonging to Copper Springs residents. All eyes turned to Pia, who shrank under the attention. Dr. Wilson stood, voice tight with controlled anger. My daughter is 9 years old. She knows none about land schemes or Apache scouts. She was obviously manipulated by this savage. He's not a savage, Pia burst out. He was hurt and going to die. That's enough, Pia, her father hissed. Mayor Hollingsworth cleared his throat. While the child's compassion is admirable, she clearly doesn't understand the dangers. This Apache is likely one of the renegades responsible for the Jenkins cattle raid. I suggest we turn him over to the army at Fort Benson immediately, and I suggest we hear what he has to say first. Samuel Reed spoke up, his aged voice carrying surprising strength. I served alongside Apache scouts in '63. They were honorable men. This isn't your fight, old man, someone called. It's all our fight if what the sheriff says is true, Reed countered. Arguments erupted across the gathering. Mayor Hollingsworth called for order, his usual composure slipping. The Apache stays in jail until we sort this out, Blackwood declared firmly. I've sent a rider to Fort Benson requesting verification of his identity. And if they confirm he's a scout? Mrs. Abernathy asked, speaking for the first time. Then we consider his claims carefully, Blackwood replied, eyes fixed on the mayor. This is outrageous, Hollingsworth sputtered. You're giving credence to an Apache over your own mayor based on a child's testimony. Pia stood suddenly, pulling something from her pocket. The bone whistle caught the sunlight, its polished surface gleaming. Stephen gave me this to protect me, she announced, voice ringing clear over the crowd's murmurs. He could have hurt me any time, but he only told me stories and taught me about the stars. He was a scout who helped the army. Why would he lie? Pia, enough. Doc Wilson pulled her back to her seat. But the damage was done. The whistle had caught Mrs. Abernathy's attention. Her face drained of color as she pushed forward through the crowd, ignoring protests. Let me see that, she demanded, extending her hand to Pia. Reluctantly, Pia surrendered the whistle. Mrs. Abernathy examined it, fingers trembling slightly. This carving, the spiral with 7 points, is the mark of Chief Grey Wolf's band. She looked up, meeting the shocked gazes around her. I recognize it, because I lived among them. For 6 months, after they rescued me from Comancheros who murdered my husband, a stunned silence fell over the gathering. Mrs. Abernathy, the prime schoolteacher from Boston, had lived with Apaches. Eleanor, Mayor Hollingsworth said carefully, "This is hardly the time for—" "It's exactly the time," she interrupted. "I want to see this prisoner." "Now wait just a minute," Blackwood began. "I can identify if he's truly from Grey Wolf's band," she insisted. "If he is, then his word deserves consideration." The crowd erupted again, opinions divided, voices rising. Through the chaos, Pia caught Samuel Reed watching Mrs. Abernathy with newfound respect, nodding slightly, as if pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. In that moment, with the town in uproar and the adults shouting over one another, Pia realized that by trying to save one life, she had set in motion events that would change many more. For better or worse, Copper Springs would never be the same. Wilson's hands trembled slightly as he applied iodine to the scrape on Pia's knee. They sat in his examination room, the late afternoon sun slanting through dusty windows. After the town meeting had dissolved into arguments, he'd marched her straight home, a thunderous silence between them. "Does it hurt?" he asked, his voice gentler than his expression. "No, Papa." Pia watched him carefully. "Are you very angry with me?" Dr. Wilson capped the iodine bottle with deliberate precision. "Angry doesn't begin to describe it, Pia Margaret Wilson. You lied to me, repeatedly. You put yourself in terrible danger. His voice broke, unexpectedly. "You could have been killed. Stephen wouldn't hurt me. You don't know that." The sudden force of his words made her flinch. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "You don't know anything about this man." "I do," she insisted. "He told me about his father, about Apache ceremonies, about—" "Stop," he held up his hand. "I don't want to hear what tales he spun to gain your trust. They weren't tales. They were true stories." Dr. Wilson stood abruptly, pacing the small room. "Pia, you're 9 years old. There are complexities you don't understand about the Apache, about men like him, because they're different from us, because they're dangerous." He snapped, then immediately regretted his tone. More gently, he added, "The raids on the Jenkins ranch, the Taylor family found dead last spring. These weren't accidents. Stephen said some Apache do bad things, just like some white men do bad things. He said war makes monsters of many men, no matter their skin color." Wilson stared at his daughter, momentarily speechless. The words were too mature, too measured to be her own. Yet she spewed them with complete conviction. "He told you that?" Pia nodded. "He also said his people believe children see truth that adults have forgotten." A knock at the door saved him from having to respond. Sheriff Blackwood entered, hat in hand, his expression grave. "Thomas." "Pia," he nodded to each of them. "Need to ask a few more questions, if that's all right." Dr. Wilson gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Pia was just going to her room to think about the seriousness of her actions. "Actually," Blackwood said, "I need to speak with her first." The doctor's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. Blackwood pulled a worn leather notebook from his pocket and settled his large frame onto the too small chair. "Pia, when you found the Apache Stephen, what condition was he in?" "He was very sick," she answered readily. "Feverish. The chains had cut his wrists. He could barely move." "Did he tell you who put him there?" "Just men who fear what I know. But later he said it was because he found papers about stealing land." Blackwood made a note. "And you've been visiting him for 5 days, she admitted. 3 times each day." Wilson inhaled sharply but remained silent. "Each time you brought supplies, food, medicine?" Pia glanced guiltily at her father. "Yes, sir." "Did he ever threaten you, try to send you for help, ask about the town or who lived here?" She shook her head emphatically. "Never. He told me I shouldn't help him at first, said it was dangerous. But you kept going back. He needed help," she said simply. "Mama always said we should help people who need it." The mention of his late wife seemed to deflate Dr. Wilson's anger somewhat. He passed a weary hand over his face. "That'll be all for now, Pia," Blackwood said kindly. Your father and I need to talk." Once she had reluctantly left the room, Blackwood turned to his friend. "Thomas, I know this is difficult, but that Apache's story might have merit. You can't seriously believe I've known you 20 years. Known Pia since she was born. That child doesn't lie. She's being manipulated, John." "Maybe, but I received an interesting visitor while you were bringing her home." Blackwood leaned forward. Eleanor Abernethy came to identify the prisoner, nearly fainted when she saw him, called him two bears, and started speaking Apache. Dr. Wilson's eyebrows rose. "Eleanor, a schoolteacher, the very same. Turns out she wasn't entirely forthcoming about her past. She was captured by Comancheros in '65, rescued by Grey Wolf's band, lived with them until the army found her. And this, Stephen, he's from that band. Grey Wolf's son, according to her, which matches what he told me about being a chief's son." Dr. Wilson stood, moving to the window. Outside, Copper Springs continued its daily rhythms, though clusters of people stood talking, glancing toward the jailhouse. "Even if that's true, John, it doesn't mean his claims about Hollingsworth have merit. Maybe not, but there's something you should see." From inside his vest, Blackwood withdrew a folded paper, yellowed with age. He smoothed it carefully on the desk. Wilson recognized it immediately, the original land grant for his small ranch north of town, purchased when he and Margaret first arrived. "Look at the survey markers," Blackwood said, pointing to the document's corners. Dr. Wilson frowned. "What about them? Now look at this." He produced a second paper, newer, crisper. This was in Hollingsworth's desk. Reed managed to borrow it briefly while the mayor was occupied at the meeting. It was a map of the same area but with different boundaries. Properties, including Wilson's, had been redrawn. Their borders shifted to create a straight line through the center. A railroad line, Dr. Wilson breathed, understanding dawning. "Exactly. And guess who recently purchased significant shares in Arizona Western Railway? Hollingsworth." The doctor sank back into his chair. "But this is fraud, theft." "It's worse," Blackwood said grimly. "The Jenkins raid that everyone's been blaming on rogue Apache. I found cavalry buttons near the scene. Army issue. You're suggesting it was staged to increase tensions. Nothing like an Apache threat to justify military intervention and land appropriation." Blackwood's weathered face was solemn. "That warrior may be the only one who can prove it. If he really hid documents as he claims." Wilson stared at the maps, thinking of his land. Margaret's land, the place they'd chosen to build a life, to raise their daughter. "What now?" he asked finally. "Eleanor's talking to him. Samuel Reed is gathering information quietly, but Hollingsworth has sent for reinforcements from Fort Benson. When they arrive," Blackwood left the implication hanging, "they'll take him, and any evidence disappears." "Exactly." From her eavesdropping position outside the partially open door, Pia clutched the bone whistle in her pocket, its smooth surface warm against her fingers. The grown-ups thought they were protecting her by sending her away, but she had heard everything. Stephen was in danger, and somehow she knew she would need to help him again. Mrs. Eleanor Abernethy sat ramrod straight on the wooden stool outside Stephen's cell, her usual prom demeanor at odds with the words flowing from her mouth. Fluid Apache phrases that sounded strange yet natural on her tongue. Stephen responded in kind, their conversation incomprehensible to Sheriff Blackwood, who watched from his desk with poorly disguised fascination. "I never thought to see Grey Wolf's son in chains again," she said finally in English, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nor did I expect to find Singing Bird teaching white children their letters," Stephen replied, using the Apache name she had once been given. A faint smile touched her lips. "I haven't been called that in 20 years, yet you remember our tongue perfectly. Some things become part of you." Her fingers unconsciously traced the silver cross at her neck. "Even when you try to forget them." Blackwood cleared his throat. "Mrs. Abernethy, does his story hold up? About being an army scout? About the documents?" She nodded slowly. "Two bears. Stephen served as a scout under Captain Reeves for 8 years. He was respected, decorated even. If he says he found incriminating documents, I believe him. Thank you, Singing Bird, Stephen said quietly. Don't. She raised a hand. I'm not that person anymore. I'm Mrs. Abernathy now. I have been for a long time. A knowing look passed between them, an acknowledgement of choices made, paths diverted. Where did you hide the documents? Blackwood pressed. In the sacred cave at Three Eagle Mountain, Stephen answered. No white man would find them there. No white man could reach them either, I'd wager. I could draw a map anyone could follow, Mrs. Abernathy pointed out, including Hollingsworth's men. Stephen's gaze shifted between them. Then I must retrieve them myself, Blackwood snorted. And how do you propose to do that from inside a jail cell? Before Stephen could answer, the door swung open. Samuel Reed entered, his aged frame moving with surprising purpose. He nodded to Mrs. Abernathy, then turned to the sheriff. Riders coming, he reported. 5 men, moving fast from the direction of Fort Benson. All ready? Blackwood stood, checking his pocket watch. That's too quick. Hollingsworth's messenger couldn't have reached the fort and returned with soldiers this fast. Not soldiers, Reed corrected grimly. Bounty hunters. Hanford and his crew. Mrs. Abernathy paled. James Hanford, the man who, the very same, Reed confirmed. Stephen's expression hardened at the name. Hanford collects Apache scalps. $50 each from certain officers who don't ask questions. How long? Blackwood demanded. 20 minutes. Maybe less. The sheriff's mind worked rapidly. Hollingsworth must have sent for them before we even found you, he said to Stephen. He knew you hadn't died as planned. He wants this finished before the real army arrives, Mrs. Abernathy concluded. Stephen rose to his full height. I cannot die yet, not before the documents are found. Agreed, Blackwood said grimly. He unhooked the keyring from his belt. Reed, can you still shoot that old Sharps rifle you keep under your counter? A slow smile spread across the elderly shopkeeper's weathered face. Like riding a horse, Sheriff. Some skills you never forget. Get it. Meet us behind the jail in 10 minutes. Blackwood turned to Mrs. Abernathy. Eleanor, I need you to create a distraction. Something to keep Hollingsworth occupied when those riders arrive. Consider it done. She stood smoothing her skirts with hands that betrayed only the slightest tremor. And me? Stephen asked, as Blackwood unlocked his cell. You're coming with me. We're getting those documents. 5 minutes later, Dr. Wilson answered an urgent knock to find Eleanor Abernathy on his doorstep, her usual composure replaced with barely contained urgency. I need to speak with you and Pia, she said without preamble. It's about Stephen. He hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. Pia's in her room. As he called for his daughter, Mrs. Abernathy spoke rapidly. Bounty hunters are coming for Stephen. The sheriff is helping him escape to retrieve the hidden documents. John's breaking him out. Dr. Wilson looked shocked. That's the only way to expose the truth, she finished. But they'll need help, someone who knows where to find Three Eagle Mountain. Pia appeared, eyes widening at Mrs. Abernathy's presence. What's happening? Your Apache friend is in danger, Mrs. Abernathy told her directly. Sheriff Blackwood is helping him escape, but they need to find a place called Three Eagle Mountain. I know where that is, Dr. Wilson said unexpectedly. Both turned to him in surprise. Margaret and I used to ride there when we first settled here. There's a distinctive formation, 3 stone spires that look like eagles with outstretched wings. That's it, Mrs. Abernathy confirmed. They'll need your help, Thomas. He shook his head. I can't get involved in a jailbreak, Eleanor. I'm a doctor, not an outlaw. Papa, Pia's small voice broke in. Remember what Mama always said about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Dr. Wilson stared at his daughter, seeing Margaret's determination in her eyes. Before he could respond, hoofbeats thundered down the main street. They're here, Mrs. Abernathy breathed. Pia ran to the window. 5 riders were dismounting outside the saloon, where Mayor Hollingsworth kept his office. The leader, a tall man with a scar, bisecting his left cheek, carried a rifle with scalps dangling from its stock. Oh God, Dr. Wilson whispered. following her gaze. He'd treated victims of Hanford's work before, those few who survived. Mrs. Abernathy gripped his arm. "Choose now, Thomas, for your daughter, for your wife's memory." In the tense silence, Pia reached into her pocket and withdrew a small brass object. The Army Scout badge gleamed dully in the lamplight as she placed it on the table. "I found this under Stephen's pallet in the cell when I brought him water," she explained. "He told me to keep it safe, said it proved who he was." Dr. Wilson picked up the badge, rubbing his thumb over the worn metal. The eagle insignia of the Army Scout Regiment was still clearly visible, along with the number 8, 8th Cavalry. Looking from the badge to his daughter's resolute face, Thomas Wilson made his decision. "Get your coat, Pia," he said quietly, "and bring your mother's compass from my desk. We're going to need it." The rear door of the jailhouse crashed open as Sheriff Blackwood and Stephen emerged into the gathering dusk. The Apache's wrists remained loosely shackled, enough to maintain appearances if spotted, but not enough to hinder movement. They crouched behind stacked crates, surveying the alley. "We'll need horses," Blackwood muttered, "and weapons," Stephen added. "Hanford will not be taken alive." The sheriff nodded grimly. "Reed should be here any." A low whistle interrupted him. Samuel Reed materialized from the shadows, his stooped figure carrying a canvas-wrapped bundle. His old Army Sharps rifle jutted from a makeshift sling on his back. "Got what you need," he said, unwrapping the bundle to reveal a Colt revolver, ammunition and a hunting knife. "Good man." Blackwood handed the revolver to Stephen, who checked it with practiced efficiency despite his shackles. "Livery stables being watched," Reed reported, "but I've got Peterson's mare and the Mitchell boys' Pinto tethered behind the church." A shout from the direction of the main street froze them in place. Hanford's gravelly voice carried clearly, "Check the jail first. 500 to the man who brings me the Apache's head." "That's our cue," Blackwood said, securing his gun belt. They moved quickly through the shadows behind the row of buildings. The town's attention was focused on the commotion in the main street, Hanford and his men making a show of their arrival, Hollingsworth greeting them with forced joviality. At the church, they found not just 2 horses, but 4, and Doc Wilson adjusting the girth on his bay gelding, while Pia held the reins of her smaller pony. "Thomas?" Blackwood looked genuinely surprised. "What the hell are you doing?" "Apparently becoming an outlaw," Dr. Wilson replied dryly. Eleanor explained the situation. "You can't bring the child," Stephen said immediately. "Try stopping her." Dr. Wilson nodded toward his daughter, whose determined expression brooked no argument. "Besides, we need her. She knows the whistle signals you taught her. If we get separated in the dark—" "I'm coming," Pia stated flatly, meeting Stephen's concerned gaze. Before the Apache could protest further, another figure slipped from the church shadows. Mrs. Abernathy, now dressed in riding clothes that no proper schoolteacher should possess, her grey-streaked hair pulled back in a practical braid. "Singing bird," Stephen acknowledged with a hint of amusement. "Just for tonight," she corrected, swinging easily into the saddle of the 4th horse. "I've created a diversion. Hollingsworth believes I'm organizing the women to prepare food for his bounty hunters. It won't hold him long." Blackwood looked between his unlikely allies, an elderly shopkeeper, a schoolteacher with a mysterious past, a doctor, a child, and an Apache warrior. "This is either providence or madness. Often the same thing," Reed observed, securing his rifle. Shouts erupted from the direction of the jail. Their absence had been discovered. "North Ridge," Blackwood directed. "Stay together until we clear the creek. Then we'll—" A rifle shot split the night. A chunk of church wall splintered, inches from Stephen's head. "Riders," Reed warned, spotting mounted figures at the end of the street. "Go," Blackwood urged, helping Pia onto her pony. "We'll follow." Stephen vaulted onto Peterson's mare with the fluid grace of a lifetime horseman, despite his bound wrists. Dr. Wilson and Mrs. Abernathy were already moving, staying low in their saddles. As they broke for the edge of town, more shots rang out. Reed turned, raising his Sharps rifle in one smooth motion. The thunderous report momentarily drowned the shouts and pounding hoofbeats. One of the pursuing riders tumbled from his saddle. "Still got it," the old man muttered with grim satisfaction. Blackwood fired his revolver twice, aiming high, warning shots to slow the pursuit rather than kill. "Get moving, Reed." The shopkeeper swung onto his horse with surprising agility for his age, and together they galloped after the others. The fleeing group converged at the creek that marked Copper Springs' northern boundary. Moonlight silvered the landscape, offering just enough light to navigate the treacherous terrain. Stephen took the lead, instinctively finding paths through the rocky ground that wouldn't leave traceable hoofprints. Three Eagle Mountain is 8 miles north, Dr. Wilson called, pointing to a darker mass against the starlit horizon. "But there's open ground before the foothills. They'll see us crossing." "We separate," Stephen decided. "Sheriff, take Reed and Dr. Wilson along the creek bed. The water will hide your tracks. Mrs. Abernathy, you and Pia come with me through the high rocks." "No," Blackwood objected. "Too dangerous to split up." "More dangerous to stay together," Stephen countered. "I can protect them better if we're moving fast through terrain. Hanford's men won't follow." Hoofbeats pounded in the distance, the pursuit regrouping. "He's right," Mrs. Abernathy said. "I know these paths too. We'll rendezvous at the eastern base of Three Eagle." "Papa?" Pia looked uncertainly at her father. "It's all right," he assured her, though his expression suggested otherwise. "Mrs. Abernathy and Stephen will keep you safe. Remember what I taught you about using the stars to navigate?" She nodded bravely. "The North Star stays over your right shoulder if you're heading east. That's my girl." He leaned across to squeeze her hand. "See you at the mountain." As they prepared to separate, Stephen turned to Blackwood. "If we're not there by dawn, we'll find you," the sheriff promised. "Now go." Stephen led Pia and Miss Abernathy toward a nearly invisible gap in the rocks, while the men continued along the creek bed. Within moments, both groups had vanished into the darkness, leaving only the sound of distant pursuit. In the moonlight, something gleamed briefly on the ground where they had stopped. A silver badge that had fallen from Blackwood's vest during their hurried conflict. The sheriff's star winked once in the pale light before being trampled under the hooves of Hanford's approaching men, pressed into the mud beside the creek that marked the boundary between law and wilderness, civilization and survival. Moonlight transformed the desert into a silver-blue landscape of shadows and secrets. Stephen led their small party through a maze of rock formations with unerring confidence, though his last visit had been years before. Mrs. Abernathy followed closely with Pia between them. "How much farther?" Pia whispered, her small hands tight on the reins. "Not far to safe ground," Stephen assured her. "You ride well for one so young." "Papa taught me, Mama too before she died." Stephen nodded. "The spirit of a horse responds to the spirit of its rider. Yours recognizes courage." They navigated a narrow passage between towering rocks, emerging onto a small plateau. Stephen halted, raising his hand for silence. In the distance, faint shouts echoed, Hanford's men quartering the landscape. "They're staying with the creek," Mrs. Abernathy observed, following the sheriff's group. "For now," Stephen agreed. "But Hanford knows these lands. He will split his forces soon." He dismounted, kneeling to examine the ground. With his still shackled hands, he gathered a handful of sand, letting it sift through his fingers. "What are you doing?" Pia asked, sliding from her pony to watch. "Reading the earth. Feel." He took her small hand, pressing it into the cool sand. "The ground remembers those who pass. It holds secrets for those who listen." Pia's eyes widened as she felt the subtle difference in texture. "It's damp underneath. An underground spring," Mrs. Abernathy explained, joining them. "They run beneath these formations. That's how the sacred caves stay cool, even in summer." Stephen nodded approval. "You remembered well, singing bird. Some lessons cannot be unlearned." She unconsciously touched the silver cross at her neck, a habit Stephen had noticed before. "The cross," he said quietly. "It belonged to him." "Your husband?" She stiffened slightly, then nodded. "Robert gave it to me on our wedding day. Before the Comancheros." "I am sorry for your loss," Stephen said simply. "He died with courage. You saw." I was with the hunting party that found your wagon. We were too late for him, but in time for you." Mrs. Abernathy's composed facade cracked momentarily. "I never knew who found me first. I was not myself for many days after. Grey Wolf ordered us to care for you as one of our own. He said, 'The woman has seen the worst of men. Now she must see the best.' Your father was a wise man." Her voice had softened. "Is he still?" "He walks with the ancestors now, 4 winters past." Pierre listened to this exchange with quiet fascination, understanding there was history between these adults that went deeper than she had imagined. The way Miss Abernathy spoke, her usual precise diction giving way to something more fluid, was like watching a familiar face transform into someone new. A distant gunshot interrupted the moment. All 3 tensed, listening. "We should continue," Stephen decided. "The caves are still 2 miles east." As they remounted, Pierre noticed Stephen surreptitiously loosening his shackles, working his wrists back and forth. The metal had chafed raw rings into his skin. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "Pain is a teacher," he replied. "It reminds us we are alive." They pressed on, leaving the plateau for rougher ground. The horses picked their way carefully through scattered boulders and scrub brush. Above them, stars wheeled in patterns Stephen had taught Pierre to recognize: the Great Bear, the Hunter, the 7 Sisters. After nearly an hour of silent travel, Stephen halted again, his posture suddenly alert. Mrs. Abernathy noticed it too, her hand moving to the small revolver hidden in her riding jacket. "What is it?" Pierre whispered. "Riders," Stephen murmured. "Coming fast from the south." "Hanford?" "No, different approach." He cocked his head, listening intently. 3 riders, moving too confidently for Hanford's men in unfamiliar territory. "Could be the sheriff's group," Mrs. Abernathy suggested. "Perhaps," but his tone conveyed doubt. Stephen led them behind a large rock formation, concealing their horses in a shallow depression. "Stay here," he instructed, removing a leather pouch from around his neck. From it, he extracted a small amount of dark powder, which he smeared across his face in swift, practiced movements, black streaks that broke up the copper planes of his features, rendering him nearly invisible in the darkness. "War paint?" Pierre asked, eyes wide. "Shadow medicine," he corrected, "to move unseen." Before either could protest, he melted into the darkness with silent grace. Mrs. Abernathy drew her revolver, positioning herself protectively beside Pierre. "Will he come back?" the girl asked anxiously. "Yes," Mrs. Abernathy assured her. 2 bears never abandons his people." Minibs stretched endlessly. The approaching hoofbeats grew louder, then slowed, suggesting the riders sensed something amiss. Pierre clutched the bone whistle in her pocket, wondering if this qualified as the true need Stephen had mentioned. A soft bird call, 3 notes, rising and falling, came from the darkness to their right. Mrs. Abernathy visibly relaxed. "Apache signal," she explained. "Friends approach." Moments later, Stephen reappeared, followed by 3 figures leading horses: Sheriff Blackwood, Wilson, and Samuel Reed. "Papa!" Pierre broke cover, running to her father, who swept her into a fierce embrace. "Thank God," he breathed. "When we heard shooting, Hanford found our trail at the creek crossing," Blackwood explained tersely. "Reed winged one of them, bought us time to break away." The elderly shopkeeper looked pleased with himself, despite a bleeding graze along his left arm. "Forgot how exhilarating a good firefight can be." "You need that bandaged," Dr. Wilson said, medical instincts overriding everything else. As he tended Reed's wound with supplies from his saddlebag, Stephen conferred quietly with Blackwood and Mrs. Abernathy. "The cave entrance is less than a mile east," he told them, "but it's sacred ground. Few know of its existence." "Will we find it in the dark?" Blackwood asked. "I will find it," Stephen assured him. "But there is another problem. My people may have posted sentinels nearby. They would view armed white men as a threat." "What do you suggest?" Stephen considered, then untied a braided leather cord from his wrist. The simple bracelet was decorated with 3 turquoise beads and a single eagle feather. "This is my guardian token," he explained. "Given when I became a scout, any Apache who sees it will know I sent you." He handed it to Blackwood. "If we are separated and you encounter my people, show this. Say Nan Tartaze seeks the eagle's truth. They will understand." The sheriff nodded, securing the bracelet around his own wrist. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." As Dr. Wilson finished with Reed's bandage, the old man tilted his head, listening intently. "Company coming," he warned, "and they're not being subtle about it." In the distance, multiple riders approached from the direction of Copper Springs. Lantern light bounced eerily across the landscape. "Hanford," Blackwood confirmed grimly. "And it looks like he's brought reinforcements." Stephen made a swift decision. "No time for stealth now. We ride hard for the caves." As they mounted up, Pia noticed the turquoise bracelet now adorning the sheriff's wrist. A small token of trust between cultures that had so long been divided, and might now be their only hope for survival. The mouth of the cave appeared suddenly, a dark slash in the moonlit rock face, barely wide enough for a man to pass through sideways. Stephen dismounted first, motioning for the others to remain back while he approached cautiously, head bowed in respect. "What's he doing?" Dr. Wilson whispered. "Asking permission," Mrs. Abernathy explained softly. "These caves are sacred to his people, burial grounds of ancient chiefs." Stephen placed his palm against the stone beside the entrance, murmuring words too low to hear. After a moment he gestured for them to approach. "We may enter, but with respect," he instructed. "Speak softly. Touch nothing unless I indicate." Blackwood organized their retreat efficiently. "Reed, you and I will guard the entrance. The rest of you go with Stephen." "I should stay too," Dr. Wilson protested. "If there's shooting, you're needed inside," Blackwood countered. "The girl trusts you and Mrs. Abernathy." Reluctantly, Dr. Wilson nodded, lifting Pia from her pony. Reed unsheathed his Sharp's rifle, positioning himself behind a boulder with a clear view of their back trail. Stephen led the remaining three into the narrow passage. The temperature dropped immediately as cool, dry air enveloped them. After several yards of darkness, the passage opened into a chamber where moonlight filtered through a crack in the ceiling, illuminating ancient pictographs etched into the walls, hunting scenes, spirit figures, battles fought long before white men walked these lands. "This way," Stephen directed, selecting a smaller tunnel branching leftward. Dr. Wilson produced a small lantern from his saddlebag, its light casting long shadows as they proceeded deeper. The tunnel twisted downward, requiring them to crouch in places. Pia stayed close to her father, eyes wide with equal parts fear and wonder. Mrs. Abernathy moved with surprising confidence for a schoolteacher, occasionally running her fingers over rock formations, as if greeting old friends. "How much farther?" Dr. Wilson asked, ducking beneath a low overhang. "Not far," Stephen assured him. "The inner chamber lies beyond the next." A distant gunshot echoed through the tunnel, followed by another. They froze, listening. "The sheriff," Dr. Wilson said grimly. "Hanford found us." Stephen's face hardened in the lantern light. "We must hurry." They moved faster now, caution tempered by urgency. The tunnel widened gradually until it opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness overhead. Stalactites hung like ancient teeth, water dripping rhythmically to form pools on the stone floor. In the lantern's glow, they saw evidence of human presence, a circle of stones marking a ceremonial space, fragments of pottery, faded paint on the walls depicting spirit journeys and transformations. Stephen moved directly to a particular stalactite near the chamber's center, thicker than the others, with a distinctive spiral pattern naturally formed in the stone. Kneeling before it, he reached into a crevice at its base that would have been invisible without knowing exactly where to look. "Here," he announced, withdrawing an oilskin-wrapped package approximately the size of a small book. More gunshots echoed, closer now, accompanied by shouts. "We need to leave," Dr. Wilson urged, gripping Pia's shoulder protectively. Stephen nodded, securing the package inside his shirt. "There is another way out," A passage that emerges on the mountain's eastern face. Will Blackwood and Reed know to find us there? I told the sheriff to retreat eastward if overwhelmed. Stephen confirmed. Before they could move, a sharp cry of pain echoed through the tunnels. Reed's voice. Then came the unmistakable sound of boots on stone. Multiple sets, approaching rapidly. Too late, Mrs. Abernathy whispered. They're already inside. Stephen made a swift decision. The alternative passage. Now. He led them toward a dark recess in the chamber's far wall. As they moved, Wilson stumbled suddenly, gasping in pain. His leg buckled beneath him, sending the lantern clattering across the stone floor, where it sputtered, but maintained its flame. "Papa!" Pia cried out. Dr. Wilson grimaced, clutching his knee. "Old mining injury. Sometimes it gives way." Stephen doubled back, assessing the situation quickly. "Can you walk?" "With help, yes." The approaching footsteps grew louder. Stephen looked toward the escape route, then back at the injured doctor. "Take this," he said, pressing the oilskin package into Mrs. Abernathy's hands. The eastern passage follows watermarks on the right wall. It narrows but remains passable. "What about you?" she demanded, already knowing his answer. "I will delay them." Stephen helped Dr. Wilson to his feet, supporting him until Mrs. Abernathy took his weight. "Get them out, singing bird. The documents must reach Fort Benson." "Stephen, no," Pia protested. He knelt quickly before her. "Remember the whistle, little healer. Use it when you reach safety." Without waiting for further objections, Stephen retrieved something from a small pouch at his waist. A leather medicine bag embroidered with elaborate beadwork, hanging from a cord of braided sinew. He pressed it into Pia's hands. "My father's medicine," he explained rapidly. "It holds his wisdom, his protection. Keep it close." "I can't take this," she protested. "You must. Now go." Mrs. Abernathy pulled Dr. Wilson toward the escape tunnel, her face set with determination. "Come, Pia, quickly." The girl hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. "You promised we'd see the eagle dance." Stephen's stern expression softened momentarily. "And so we shall, brave one. This is not our ending." The sound of men entering the outer chamber forced the moment to its conclusion. With a gentle push, Stephen directed Pia after her father and Miss Abernathy. As they disappeared into the darkened passage, Stephen retrieved the lantern. Rather than following them, he moved to the chamber's center, standing tall with the light illuminating him fully. A deliberate target. His hands moved to the remaining shackles on his wrist. With a sudden, powerful motion born of days of gradual loosening, he wrenched them apart, metal links snapping with a sound like a gunshot. Free at last, two bears of the Apache nation rolled his shoulders and prepared to meet his enemies. The eastern passage narrowed until they were forced to move sideways, backs pressed against cold stone. Mrs. Abernathy led the way, one hand guiding Dr. Wilson while the other traced the watermarks Stephen had mentioned. Without a lantern, darkness enveloped them completely. "Keep your hand on my shoulder, Pia," Dr. Wilson instructed, his voice tight with pain. "Don't let go." Pia obeyed, her small fingers clutching her father's coat. Her other hand remained wrapped around Stephen's medicine bag, its beaded surface pressing reassuringly against her palm. Behind them, shouts echoed through the cave system, followed by a thunderous report. "Stephen's revolver." "He'll be all right, won't he, Papa?" she whispered. Dr. Wilson couldn't bring himself to lie. "Stephen knows what he's doing, sweetheart." The passage descended sharply, then leveled out. Water seeped around their ankles, cold and startling. "Underground stream," Mrs. Abernathy explained. "It means we're close to the exit." They waded forward, the water rising to Pia's knees. Dr. Wilson lifted her onto his back, despite his injured leg. The stream's current strengthened, pulling at their legs as the passage curved leftward. A faint grayness appeared ahead, not daylight, but the lesser darkness of night sky. Mrs. Abernathy quickened her pace. Almost there, she encouraged. They emerged onto a narrow ledge, halfway up the mountain's eastern face. The desert stretched below them, silvered by moonlight. Stars burned overhead in the vast Arizona sky, offering just enough light to assess their situation. The ledge extended along the cliff face for perhaps 50 yards before descending in a treacherous scree slope. No sign of Sheriff Blackwood or Reed, though they hadn't expected to find them here. "We need to keep moving," Miss Abernathy decided, securing the document package more firmly inside her jacket. "If we can reach the valley before dawn, we might find horses." "Whose horses?" Dr. Wilson asked, easing Pia down from his back. "Apache. There's a seasonal camp 3 miles east. You want to walk into an Apache camp with a white man and child? You have a better suggestion?" she countered. "Hanford's men will expect us to head back toward Copper Springs." Before he could respond, Pia tugged urgently at his sleeve. "Listen." From inside the cave came the sounds of conflict, shouts, another gunshot, then a cry of pain that wasn't Stephen's voice. After that, silence fell, heavy with possibility. "We can't leave him," Pia insisted. "We have no choice," her father replied gently. "The documents are worthless if he dies." Tears streaked her face, glinting in the moonlight. Mrs. Abernathy knelt beside her. "Stephen stayed behind to give us time, Pia. We honor his choice by using it wisely." The girl's fingers tightened around the medicine bag. "His father's protection," she whispered. "He said it holds wisdom." An idea formed in her expression. Pulling the bone whistle from her pocket, she held it alongside the medicine bag. "He said to use the whistle when we reached safety." What if it could help him now? "Pia," Dr. Wilson began doubtfully. "Let her try," Mrs. Abernathy interrupted, something ancient stirring in her eyes. "Apache medicine has power beyond our understanding." Pia stepped to the ledge's edge, facing the vast open space. Bringing the eagle bone whistle to her lips, she blew with all the force her small lungs could muster. The note that emerged was pure and penetrating, higher than seemed possible from such a small instrument. It carried across the desert, echoing off distant messiahs. She blew twice more, creating the 3-note pattern she'd heard Stephen use earlier. For long moments after, they stood in silence. The night remained still except for the whisper of wind through scrub brush far below. Then, faintly at first but growing stronger, came an answering call. Not a whistle, but a deeper sound like a wooden flute, playing the same 3 notes in reverse pattern. "Apache signal," Mrs. Abernathy breathed. Someone heard. Movement caught their attention on the valley floor, shadows detaching from deeper shadows, moving with purpose toward the mountain. "Are they friendlies?" Dr. Wilson asked nervously. "We'll soon find out." Miss Abernathy straightened her spine, years falling away as she adopted the posture of a woman who had once lived among these people. The figures approached the base of the mountain with remarkable speed. As they drew closer, details became visible. 5 warriors on horseback, armed with rifles, their hair worn in the distinctive style of Grey Wolf's band. The lead rider halted, looking up at their position on the ledge. Even from a distance, his commanding presence was unmistakable. "The one in front," Mrs. Abernathy said quietly. "That's Black Knife, Stephen's cousin and Grey Wolf's nephew. Will he help us?" Dr. Wilson asked. "If he recognizes me, perhaps." The warrior raised his arm in a gesture neither threatening nor welcoming, simply acknowledging their presence. Mrs. Abernathy stepped forward, hands visible. "Black Knife," she called in Apache. Singing bird returns with 2 bears message. A long pause followed. Then the warrior gestured again, signaling his men to spread out around the mountain's base. "She's sending men to find a path up," she translated, and she stopped suddenly, listening to his next calls. "2 bears is in danger. Nantan Taza fights enemies in the sacred cave." He understood all that from just a few words. Dr. Wilson asked skeptically. "Apache language is precise," she replied, before calling down again in the same tongue. The exchange continued briefly. Mrs. Abernathy's expression grew increasingly grave. "What is it?" Pia asked anxiously. Black Knife says white men have been tracking their movements for days. Army soldiers working with men who are not soldiers. Hollingsworth's conspiracy, Dr. Wilson realized. It's bigger than we thought. Mrs. Abernathy nodded. The document Stephen recovered may be the only proof. Black Knife issued a sharp command. 2 warriors immediately rode off eastward at a gallop, while the remaining 2 began scaling the slope toward their position with remarkable agility. They're going to help us down, Mrs. Abernathy explained. Then we ride for their camp. What about Steve? Pia insisted, clutching the medicine bag. Mrs. Abernathy translated the question. Black Knife's response was terse. He says his men will find 2 bears. Her voice softened as she added, he also says the eagle whistle has awakened the mountain spirits. They protect their own. Wilson looked doubtful, but kept his skepticism to himself as he watched the approaching warriors. I hope he's right, he murmured. For all our sakes. From the medicine bag in Pia's hands came an unexpected warmth, as if responding to her concern. Looking down, she saw the intricate beadwork catching moonlight, white beads forming the shape of an eagle in flight against a backdrop of blue and black. The Apache camp appeared suddenly in the pre-dawn darkness, a collection of brush shelters arranged in a traditional circle on the valley floor, partially concealed by a stand of cottonwoods near a spring. No fire burned to betray their location. Only the soft nickering of horses and the occasional movement of a blanket-wrapped figure suggested human presence. Black Knife led their small party into the camp with quiet authority. Pia rode double with her father, while Miss Abernathy sat straight-backed on her own mount, exchanging occasional words with their guide in his native tongue. As they dismounted, curious faces emerged from the shelters, women with children clutching their skirts, elderly men with deep-set eyes that assessed the newcomers with neither hostility nor welcome. An ancient woman, her face a topography of wrinkles, approached Black Knife and spoke rapid words too low to hear. The medicine woman, Mrs. Abernathy, explained softly to Dr. Wilson and Pia. She wants to know why he brings white people to their hidden place. Black Knife responded at length, occasionally gesturing toward Mrs. Abernathy and the medicine bag still clutched in Pia's hands. The old woman's gaze sharpened as she focused on the small girl. Come, she commanded in surprisingly clear English, beckoning Pia forward. Dr. Wilson moved protectively closer to his daughter. What does she want? To see Grey Wolf's medicine, Mrs. Abernathy translated. It's a great honor, Thomas. She wouldn't ask if she meant harm. After a moment's hesitation, Dr. Wilson nodded. Reluctant Pia stepped forward, holding out the beaded bag with solemn care. The medicine woman didn't touch it. Instead, she studied Pia's face intently, then made a small gesture of acceptance. 2 bears gave this freely. Pia nodded. To protect us. A subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere of the camp. The watching faces relaxed fractionally, and Black Knife issued orders that sent several warriors to set up a larger shelter. They're accepting us, Mrs. Abernathy murmured. For now. Inside the newly prepared shelter, they were offered water and dried meat, while Black Knife conferred with his warriors outside. Dr. Wilson sank gratefully onto a woven mat, stretching his injured leg before him. Mrs. Abernathy helped him remove his boot to examine the swelling knee. Will the Apache really help Stephen? Pia asked, watching the activity outside. Mrs. Abernathy nodded. Black Knife has already sent his best men. 2 bears is his blood. And the documents? Dr. Wilson inquired quietly, mindful of listening ears. In answer, Miss Abernathy carefully extracted the oilskin package from inside her jacket. Safe, but we should examine them while we have the chance. She unwrapped the protective covering to reveal several folded papers, yellowed but legible. Military letterhead topped the first page, followed by a detailed map with property boundaries marked in red ink. Spreading them carefully on the ground between them, they bent closer. My God, Dr. Wilson breathed, recognizing the topography instantly. This isn't just about a few properties. They're redrawing the entire territorial boundary. Moving the reservation line eastward by 30 miles, Mrs. Abernathy confirmed, tracing the new demarcation with her finger. And the railroad grant directly through both Apache land and Copper Springs. But why would the Army agree to this? It violates existing treaties. Mrs. Abernathy sorted through the papers, extracting a document bearing multiple signatures. This explains it. Mineral rights. The Geological Survey found copper and silver deposits throughout the region. Dr. Wilson shook his head in disgust. So Hollingsworth isn't just after railroad money. He's planning to reopen the mines under new ownership. His ownership, Mrs. Abernathy confirmed grimly. Along with these military officers, she pointed to 3 signatures at the bottom of the order. Major Harrington, Colonel Weatherby, and General Stanton himself. A conspiracy reaching to territorial command, Dr. Wilson realized. No wonder they were willing to kill to keep it quiet. Pia, who had been examining the map with unusual intensity for a child her age, suddenly pointed to a specific location. That's our ranch, isn't it, Papa? Dr. Wilson leaned closer. Yes, that's our property. Why? There's a mark there, like the ones on the Apache land, where Miss Abernathy said the minerals are. The adults exchanged glances. Dr. Wilson studied the map more carefully, noting the small crosses marking certain properties, including his own small ranch. They've been surveying, he said slowly. All those army patrols riding through our land last spring, they weren't looking for renegade Apache. They were assessing mineral deposits and identifying which properties to seize, Mrs. Abernathy added. The same strategy they've used against the tribes for years. The shelter flap opened suddenly as Black Knife entered, his expression grave. Behind him came Sheriff Blackwood, his clothing torn and bloodied, supporting Samuel Reed, who looked even worse. Sheriff, Dr. Wilson exclaimed, struggling to his feet. Reed, what happened? Ambushed at the cave entrance, Blackwood reported grimly, easing the elderly shopkeeper onto a mat. Reed took a bullet in the shoulder. I got clipped along the ribs. Would have been worse if Black Knife's men hadn't shown up when they did. Dr. Wilson immediately shifted to physician mode, examining Reed's wound with gentle efficiency. Clean through, thankfully. No major vessels hit. I'll need my medical bag from the horse. And Stephen? Pia asked, her voice small but steady. Blackwood's face hardened. Hanford took him. They retreated when the Apache arrived, but not before. Before what? Mrs. Abernathy pressed. They have him in a wagon heading for Fort Benson. Hanford was shouting something about collecting the bounty from Major Harrington before dawn. The same Harrington who signed these land seizure orders, Dr. Wilson noted, showing Blackwood the documents while he worked on Reed's shoulder. The sheriff studied the papers, his expression darkening further. This goes higher than I imagined. Territorial command involved in land theft and murder. We need to take these documents to the federal authorities, Mrs. Abernathy insisted, someone outside the territorial command structure. The circuit judge, Reed suggested, weakly wincing as Dr. Wilson cleaned his wound, arrives in Tucson tomorrow for the quarterly court. He answers directly to Washington. Tucson's 60 miles south, Blackwood pointed out. We'd never make it in time. Not with Hanford's men between us and civilization. Black Knife, who had been listening silently, spoke in Apache. Mrs. Abernathy translated for the others. He says his people can get the papers to Tucson by the fastest routes, but someone who can testify must accompany them, someone who understands white man's law. Blackwood nodded decisively. I'll go. As county sheriff, my testimony carries weight, and Stephen, Pia insisted, refusing to let the matter drop. We can't abandon him to Hanford. Black Knife spoke again, this time directly to Pia in halting English. 2 bears is my blood. Apache do not abandon their own. From inside his buckskin shirt, he withdrew a small object, holding it out for all to see, a military telegram form, its official heading unmistakable. Dawn broke across the desert in ribbons of gold and crimson as 2 separate parties rode from the Apache camp. Sheriff Blackwood, accompanied by 3 warriors including Black Knife, headed south toward Tucson, with the damning documents secured inside his vest. The second group, Wilson, Pia, Mrs. Abernathy, and 4 Apache fighters, rode northwest toward Fort Benson. Reed had remained behind, his wound making travel impossible. The old shopkeeper had pressed his Sharps rifle into Dr. Wilson's hands before they departed. "Never thought I'd see the day I'd give a weapon to Thomas Wilson," he joked weakly. "You used to lecture me about selling ammunition to hot-headed miners." "Times change," Dr. Wilson had replied, accepting the rifle with grim determination. Now, as they followed a narrow trail through rocky terrain, Dr. Wilson felt the unfamiliar weight of the rifle across his back. As a physician, he had taken an oath to preserve life, yet here he was, riding toward probable conflict with men who would kill without hesitation. "You're quiet, Papa," Pia observed, riding double with him. "Just thinking, sweetheart, about Stephen, about many things." He adjusted her more securely before him. "I'm sorry you're caught up in this. Your mother would never forgive me." Pia considered this. "I think Mama would understand. She always said doing right isn't the same as doing what's easy." Dr. Wilson felt a surge of emotion at hearing Margaret's words from his daughter's mouth. "When did you get so wise? Stephen says wisdom comes from listening to the earth and the ancestors." She patted the medicine bag, now hanging around her neck on its sinew cord. "I think Mama is one of my ancestors now." Unable to speak past the sudden tightness in his throat, Dr. Wilson simply hugged her closer. They rode in silence for a time, the Apache warriors ranging ahead and behind their small group. Mrs. Abernathy rode alongside, her transformation from schoolteacher to frontier woman now complete. She had exchanged her riding skirt for buckskin leggings, borrowed from a woman at the camp, and her gray-streaked hair hung in a single practical braid. "The Apache have an advantage Hanford doesn't expect," she said, breaking the silence. "They know this territory intimately, including every approach to the fort. Will that be enough?" Dr. Wilson asked. "We're still outnumbered. We have surprise, and we have this." She patted the saddlebag, where the military telegram resided. "Black Knife's brother works as a scout for the fort. He intercepted this message yesterday." "What does it say?" "Army reinforcements arrived today from Fort Apache, a full company under Captain James Porter." A significant look accompanied her words. Porter was Stephen's commanding officer when he served as a scout. He always dealt fairly with the tribe. "You think he might help? If we can reach him before Harrington implements his plan." She lowered her voice, glancing at Pia. "Hanford was hired to bring Stephen in dead, not alive. A dead Apache can't testify about military corruption." Dr. Wilson understood her meaning. "Then we'd better ride faster." By mid-morning they had reached a ridge overlooking the Fort Benson Road. The Apache guide signaled for them to dismount and approach carefully on foot. Crawling to the ridge's edge, they observed the dusty thoroughfare below. A wagon escorted by mounted men approached from the east, Hanford and his bounty hunters. In the wagon bed a figure lay motionless under canvas. "Stephen," Pia whispered. Wilson studied the group through Reed's field glass. 6 riders plus the driver, all armed. The lead Apache warrior, a lean, scarred man called Running Fox, spoke quietly to Mrs. Abernathy, who translated. "He says there's a place 2 miles ahead where the road cuts through a narrow pass, perfect for an ambush." Dr. Wilson considered this, physician's instincts warring with tactical necessity. "How badly is Stephen hurt? Can you tell?" She consulted with Running Fox again. "He says there was blood on the canvas, but Stephen was conscious when they loaded him. He fought until they struck him with a rifle butt." "Then we don't have much time," Dr. Wilson decided. "The pass it is." They retreated to their horses and rode hard along a parallel track, staying below the ridge to remain unseen. The Apache moved with practiced stealth, leaving minimal traces of their passage. As they approached the designated ambush point, Running Fox divided their small force strategically. 2 warriors took positions on the heights overlooking the narrowest section of the pass. Mrs. Abernathy and another fighter concealed themselves behind boulders at the western exit. Doc Wilson and Pia were placed in a protected alcove in the rock wall. "You'll stay here no matter what happens," he instructed his daughter firmly. "Promise me." Pia nodded solemnly, though her eyes betrayed her fear. "Will there be shooting, Papa?" "I hope not." He checked Reed's rifle one final time. "But if there is, cover your ears and stay down." "What about Stephen? We'll get him back." He squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. That's a doctor's promise. Running Fox approached, carrying something wrapped in a square of buckskin. He knelt beside Pia, unwrapping the bundle to reveal a small clay pot filled with reddish pigment. War paint, Mrs. Abernathy explained, joining them briefly. He's offering protection. The warrior dipped his finger into the mixture and looked questioningly at Pia. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded her reffen. With ritualistic precision, he drew a single line across each of her cheeks, then a small circle on her forehead. The mark of the eagle child, Mrs. Abernathy translated, one who carries medicine between worlds. Wilson watched with mixed emotions as his daughter was marked with Apache symbols. 2 weeks ago, he would have objected strenuously. Now he found himself strangely moved by the warrior's solemn respect for his child. "Thank you," he said to Running Fox, who acknowledged him with a slight nod before moving to his position. Left alone with Pia in their rocky shelter, Dr. Wilson found himself fingering the small silver cross his wife had always worn, the twin to Mrs. Abernathy's. He'd kept it in his pocket since Margaret's death, a private talisman. "What are you thinking, Papa?" Pia asked, watching him curiously. He smiled faintly. "That your mother would say we're in good hands, both God's and the spirits your friend Stephen believes in." The sound of approaching wagon wheels ended their conversation. Dr. Wilson peered carefully around the rock edge, rifle ready. The ambush was about to begin. The wagon rattled into the narrow pass, wheels kicking up dust that hung suspended in the still air. Hanford rode point, his scarred face watchful beneath the brim of his hat. His men followed in loose formation, rifles resting across their saddles, alert but not expecting trouble. From his position, Dr. Wilson could see the canvas-covered form in the wagon bed shift slightly. Stephen was alive and conscious, though likely bound. Running Fox waited until the entire party had entered the narrowest section of the pass before giving the signal, a perfect imitation of a desert quail's call. Instantly a boulder crashed down from above, landing just behind the last rider and effectively blocking retreat. Hanford and his men reacted with professional speed, weapons raised as they formed a defensive circle around the wagon. A second boulder smashed down in front of the lead horses, who reared in panic, nearly overturning the wagon. "Apache ambush," one of the bounty hunters shouted. The two warriors positioned on the heights revealed themselves briefly, just long enough to draw fire from the men below. Gunshots echoed deafeningly off the rock walls. Dr. Wilson steadied the rifle, focusing on the wagon driver, who was struggling to control the frightened team. Inhaling deeply, he squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, and the driver clutched his arm, the bullet having grazed, rather than killed, exactly as the physician had intended. Running Fox emerged from cover, firing with deadly accuracy. One of Hanford's men toppled from his saddle. Miss Abernathy and the fourth warrior attacked from the opposite side, creating momentary confusion among the bounty hunters. "Get down," Dr. Wilson hissed to Pia, who had instinctively risen to her knees to see better. He pushed her back into their rocky alcove, just as bullets splintered the stone near his head. The firefight intensified. Hanford directed his men with shouted commands, using the wagon for cover. Despite being outnumbered, the Apache fighters had the advantage of position and superior knowledge of the terrain. Dr. Wilson reloaded and aimed again, this time at a bounty hunter, taking deliberate aim at Running Fox. His shot went wide, but the distraction was enough for the Apache warrior to duck behind cover. "We need to reach Stephen," he muttered, scanning for an opportunity to approach the wagon. A sudden movement caught his eye. Pia had somehow slipped from their shelter and was darting between boulders, heading directly for the wagon. "Pia!" he shouted, horror flooding his veins. "Get back here!" His cry drew Hanford's attention. The bounty hunter turned, spotted the small figure, and swung his rifle toward her with deadly intent. Time seemed to slow. Dr. Wilson launched himself from cover, firing repeatedly to force Hanford to duck. Running Fox also broke position, racing toward Pia with astonishing speed. Before either could reach her, Pia had already disappeared beneath the wagon. Hanford snarled in frustration and signaled two of his men to retrieve her. Gunfire from Mrs. Abernathy's position kept them pinned down. The schoolteacher's aim was surprisingly accurate, suggesting her time with the Apache had included more than language lessons. Under the wagon, Pia crawled determinedly toward the back, where Stephen lay. Bullets thudded into the wood above her, but the heavy vehicle provided effective protection. When she reached him, she found the Apache warrior bound with ropes, his face bruised and bloodied, but his eyes alert. "Little healer," he whispered hoarsely. "You should not be here." She pulled the bone whistle from her pocket. "I brought help," she said simply, setting to work on the knots binding his wrists. Outside, the battle reached a crescendo. Dr. Wilson had worked his way closer to the wagon, desperate to reach his daughter. Running Fox provided covering fire, downing another bounty hunter with a well-placed shot. Hanford, realizing his position was deteriorating, made a strategic decision. Grabbing a stick of dynamite from his saddlebag, standard equipment for bounty hunters who sometimes tracked quarry into caves, he lit the short fuse from a match. "This ends now," he shouted, preparing to throw the explosive toward the largest cluster of rocks concealing the Apache. Wilson saw the burning fuse, understood the imminent danger, and made the only decision a father could. Breaking cover completely, he charged toward Hanford, rifle abandoned in favor of desperate speed. The bounty hunter turned, surprise flashing across his scarred features as the doctor barreled into him. They grappled for control of the dynamite, its fuse sputtering dangerously short. "Let go, you fool." Hanford snarled. "Not while my daughter's under that wagon," Wilson grunted, struggling to direct the explosive away from the others. With a savage twist, Hanford broke free, shoving the doctor backward. Raising the dynamite to throw, his arm began its forward motion, only to freeze mid-arc as a thunderous report echoed through the pass. Hanford's expression shifted from determination to confusion. He looked down at the spreading crimson stain on his chest, then up at the source of the shot. Stephen stood beside the wagon, Hanford's own dropped revolver in his hand, Pia half hidden behind his massive frame. Somehow in the chaos, she had freed him. The dynamite slipped from Hanford's nerveless fingers, its fuse mere seconds from detonation. With a desperate lunge, Wilson snatched it up and hurled it high into the empty air above the pass, where it exploded harmlessly, a thunderclap of sound and fury that momentarily froze the battle. In the ringing silence that followed, Stephen's deep voice carried clearly to friend and foe alike. "Enough death," he declared, training Hanford's revolver on the remaining bounty hunters. "Drop your weapons." Two immediately complied, letting their rifles fall. The third made a move toward his holstered pistol, only to reconsider as Running Fox's rifle barrel pressed against the back of his head. "Wise choice," Mrs. Abernathy commented, emerging from her position with the steady aim of one who had lived on the frontier's edge. Wilson scrambled to his feet and rushed to Pia, gathering her into a fierce embrace. "Don't you ever," he began, before words failed him entirely. "I had to help him, Papa," she explained simply. "The medicine bag told me how." Over her head, Dr. Wilson's eyes met Stephen's. The Apache nodded once, acknowledgement, gratitude and something deeper passing between them. "Your daughter carries powerful medicine," Stephen said quietly. "She walks between worlds without fear." Sudden hoofbeats from the western end of the pass interrupted their moment of victory. Running Fox called a warning in Apache as a dust cloud approached, resolving into a column of blue-uniformed cavalry soldiers. "Army patrol," Mrs. Abernathy confirmed grimly. "At least 20 men." Stephen straightened to his full height, still holding Hanford's revolver. "It seems our fight is not yet finished." "Wait," Dr. Wilson said, squinting at the approaching riders. "Look at their guidine." Fluttering above the column rode the distinctive swallow-tailed flag of a cavalry company. As it drew closer, the insignia became visible. 8th Cavalry Company C. Miss Abernathy's expression transformed from concern to cautious hope. "Captain Porter's company," The column halted at the pass entrance, taking in the scene of carnage with professional assessment. Their commander, a weathered officer with captain's bars and a neatly trimmed beard, rode forward alone. "I'm looking for a man called Two Bears," he announced, his gaze sweeping over the unlikely assembly before settling on Stephen. "I believe we have matters of some importance to discuss." In his hand, clearly visible to all, the captain held a folded paper bearing the official seal of the United States Army, transfer orders that would change the course of everything that followed. Fort Benson's commander's office felt unnaturally quiet after the violence of the past. Captain Porter sat behind the desk that technically belonged to Major Harrington, who now stood rigidly at attention before his own window, effectively a prisoner in his own command. Two cavalry lieutenants guarded the door while Porter reviewed the documents spread before him, the land seizure papers Stephen had hidden, the military telegram Black Knife had intercepted, and Porter's own transfer orders placing him in command of Fort Benson by order of the Department of War. "This conspiracy goes higher than I initially suspected," Porter said finally, setting down the last paper. His weathered face, lined by years of frontier service, betrayed little emotion beyond professional determination. "General Stanton's involvement is disappointing. Disappointing." Wilson couldn't restrain his incredulity. After the events of the past days, such understatement seemed almost offensive. "Men have died. My daughter was nearly killed." Porter acknowledged this with a slight inclination of his head. "My apologies, Dr. Wilson." Military habits of expression. His eyes hardened as he glanced at Harrington. "I assure you I find these actions reprehensible." Harrington maintained his rigid posture, eyes fixed on the middle distance. "I demand to be charged formally or released, Captain. This irregular detention is entirely appropriate given the evidence." Porter cut him off. "Conspiracy, fraud, misappropriation of military resources." And he added with particular emphasis, "the attempted murder of Two Bears, a former scout under official army protection." Stephen, standing near the door with Mrs. Abernathy, spoke for the first time. "Official protection. I was discharged 2 months ago." Porter removed another document from his breast pocket. "Not according to this. Your reinstatement was approved last week, backdated to cover your investigative activities." Comprehension dawned on Stephen's face. "You knew." Washington suspected irregularities in the territorial command for some time. "When your report about suspicious survey teams reached my desk, I began my own quiet investigation." Porter's expression softened slightly. "You were always my most reliable scout, Two Bears." "This is outrageous," Harrington blustered. "A conspiracy theory based on the word of an Apache against decorated officers." "Save it for your court-martial, Major," Porter interrupted coldly. "The surviving bounty hunters have already implicated you in exchange for leniency." Outside the office windows, Fort Benson hummed with unusual activity. Porter's company had effectively taken command, disarming Harrington's loyalists and securing the armory. In the parade ground, a detachment prepared to ride for Copper Springs, where Mayor Hollingsworth would soon face his own reckoning. "What happens now?" Mrs. Abernathy asked. "Justice, I hope," Porter replied. "Sheriff Blackwood should reach the circuit judge in Tucson by nightfall with duplicates of these documents. Federal warrants will follow, and the Apache land," Stephen pressed. "The treaty boundaries will be respected." Porter's tone carried the weight of personal commitment. "I give you my word." A knock at the door preceded a sergeant's entrance. "Beg pardon, Captain. The Apache child is asking for the doctor." Dr. Wilson straightened with concern. "Per? Is she all right?" "Yes, sir. Just anxious. She's with the scout's wife in the infirmary." Mrs. Abernathy smiled at Dr. Wilson's confusion. "Yellow Blossom, the medicine woman from the camp. She rode in with some of Black Knife's men after the fighting ended." Stephen nodded. "She came to tend our wounded. It is our way." The doctor excused himself, following the sergeant across the sun-baked parade ground to the infirmary. Inside he found Pierre sitting beside an elderly Apache woman, who was grinding herbs in a small stone mortar. Several injured Apache warriors rested on cots, alongside two of Hanford's men receiving treatment from the fort surgeon. "Papa," Pierre's face brightened as she ran to embrace him. "Are you helping the medicine woman?" he asked, noting the collection of herbs spread on a clean cloth beside her. "Yellow Blossom is teaching me," she confirmed. "She says I have the gift." The old woman looked up, her ancient eyes assessing Dr. Wilson with unnerving directness. To his surprise, she addressed him in halting, but clear English. "Your daughter has medicine hands. Apache blood." "No," he replied, somewhat startled. "Her mother was from Boston." Yellow Blossom shrugged, returning to her grinding. "Spirit chooses where it dwells. Not for us to question." Pierre helped her transfer the ground herbs into a small pouch, their hands moving together in practiced coordination as if they'd worked side by side for years, rather than hours. "Look, Papa." Pierre pointed to a wounded warrior whose shoulder bore a neat bandage. "I helped with the poultice for Walking Elk's wound." Yellow Blossom showed me which plants draw out infection. Dr. Wilson studied the bandaging with professional interest. "Clean work," he acknowledged, genuinely impressed. "Perhaps you'll follow your old father into medicine someday." "Two medicines better than one," Yellow Blossom commented without looking up. "Apache wisdom, white man's knowledge, together, stronger healing." The fort surgeon, overhearing as he passed, snorted skeptically. "Superstition and science make poor partners, Dr. Wilson." Before he could respond diplomatically, Pierre spoke up with unexpected authority. "Stephen says wisdom isn't owned by any one people. Truth is truth, no matter who speaks it." The surgeon blinked, clearly taken aback by such philosophy from a child. With a non-committal grunt, he moved on to his next patient. Yellow Blossom's weathered face creased in a smile. "Eagle child speaks with old soul." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the infirmary window, they saw Captain Porter crossing the parade ground with Stephen and Miss Abernathy, heading toward the fort gates where a group of riders had just arrived. "Sheriff Blackwood," Pierre exclaimed, recognizing one of the figures dismounting. Indeed, the sheriff had returned, accompanied by Black Knife and several soldiers wearing the insignia of the territorial governor's guard. Behind them came a dignified older man in a black coat, despite the heat. The circuit judge, they presumed. "Come," Dr. Wilson said, taking Pierre's hand. "I believe events are moving quickly now." Outside, they joined the gathering as Porter greeted the new arrivals. The judge, a silver-haired man with penetrating eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, wasted no time on pleasantries. "Captain Porter, I'm Judge Carlton Ramsey. These documents," he held up a leather portfolio identical to the one Porter had reviewed earlier, "require immediate action. I've issued federal warrants for Major Harrington, General Stanton, and 6 others, including Mayor Hollingsworth of Copper Springs." "Harrington is already in custody, Your Honor," Porter reported. "My men are preparing to ride for Copper Springs now." "Excellent. The governor has authorized me to establish a special court here to address these matters with appropriate urgency." The judge surveyed the diverse group assembled before him: military officers, Apache warriors, settlers, and a small girl with ceremonial paint still visible on her cheeks. His gaze lingered on Stephen. "You would be 2 bears, I presume? Your affidavit was most illuminating." "Affidavit?" Stephen looked to Blackwood, who shrugged. "Judge Ramsey insisted on proper procedure. I merely transcribed your earlier statements." The judge cleared his throat. "Indeed, and I'll need testimony from all involved." His eyes fell on Pia, including the young lady if she's willing. "She's just a child," Dr. Wilson protested instinctively. "A child who witnessed key events," the judge countered. "But fear not, Doctor. Her testimony will be taken with appropriate consideration for her age." From somewhere nearby, a bugler sounded assembly, the bright notes cutting through the afternoon heat. Soldiers moved with renewed purpose across the parade ground as Porter issued orders for the expedition to Copper Springs. In the midst of this organized chaos, Yellow Blossom approached, carrying a small bundle wrapped in white buckskin. With ceremonial gravity, she presented it to Stephen, speaking rapid Apache. "What is it?" Pia asked as Stephen carefully unwrapped the package. Inside lay a single perfect eagle feather, its shaft dyed red, attached to a carved wooden handle, with intricate symbols etched along its length. Stephen's expression betrayed rare emotion as he lifted the object with reverence. "A justice staff," he explained quietly, "given when tribal disputes must be settled with wisdom rather than weapons. It grants the bearer the right to speak truth before the Council of Elders." Aloe Blossom spoke again, gesturing toward the judge and Captain Porter. "She says to carry this when I testify before the white man's council," Stephen translated, "to remind all that justice crosses all boundaries between peoples." As the fort continued its preparations around them, Wilson found himself studying this impromptu assembly: Apache warriors and U.S. cavalry, a frontier school teacher and a federal judge, all brought together by the actions of a giant warrior and a small girl who had seen beyond appearances to the humanity beneath. Perhaps, he mused quietly to Mrs. Abernathy, this is how real change begins. Not with grand proclamations, she agreed, but with small acts of courage and understanding. Between them, Pia stood, holding Stephen's hand, the medicine bag still hanging proudly around her neck, a symbol of two worlds no longer quite so far apart. 1 year later, Copper Springs looked both familiar and transformed. The Main Street buildings stood where they always had, but fresh paint brightened their facades. New construction had begun on the north side, including a proper schoolhouse to replace the single room where Mrs. Abernathy had taught for decades. The abandoned mine offices had reopened, though the name on the sign, Wilson and Apache Cooperative Mining Company, reflected changes more profound than mere commerce. Spring had brought wildflowers to the desert, painting the usually stark landscape with splashes of yellow and purple. In the town square, formerly just a dusty intersection, stood a young cedar tree recently planted, but already reaching hopefully toward the sky. Dr. Wilson watched from his porch as Pia carefully watered the sapling, using the same tin cup that had started their extraordinary journey a year before. At nearly 11 now, she had grown taller, but her essential nature remained unchanged, curious, compassionate, and unexpectedly wise. "Think it will grow as tall as the ones in Apache territory?" she asked, looking up as he approached. "Given time and care, yes." He rested a hand on her shoulder. "Yellow Blossom says cedars can live for centuries if properly tended. Then it will be here long after we're gone." Pia considered this with the peculiar blend of childish wonder and old soul awareness that had only deepened since the events of last year. "In the future, children will sit in its shade and not even know why it was planted. Perhaps they'll read about it," Dr. Wilson suggested. "Miss Abernathy has included the whole story in her history of the territory." "Not the whole story," Pia corrected. "Stephen says some parts belong only to those who live them." Speaking of Stephen, Dr. Wilson checked his pocket watch. "We should prepare. They'll be arriving soon." Together they walked back to their home, which had expanded over the winter to include a proper treatment room where Dr. Wilson now regularly incorporated certain Apache healing methods alongside his conventional medicine. Yellow Blossom visited monthly, continuing Pia's education in traditional remedies, an arrangement that raised eyebrows among some townsfolk, but had saved at least 2 lives during the winter fever outbreak. Inside, Wilson changed into his good suit while Pia donned the new dress they'd ordered from Tucson, a compromise between white fashion and practical frontier design. Around her neck she still wore the medicine bag, now accompanied by her mother's silver cross, a personal reconciliation of the spiritual traditions that had shaped her extraordinary year. They were just finishing preparations when hoofbeats announced visitors. Through the window they saw Sheriff Blackwood riding alongside Mrs. Abernathy, who managed her horse with the natural ease she no longer bothered to disguise. Behind them came Samuel Reed in a wagon, his wounded shoulder healed but still troubling him in damp weather. "Ready?" Wilson asked his daughter. Pia nodded, tucking a small packet wrapped in clean cloth into her pocket, a gift she had prepared carefully over several days. Outside, the spring air carried the scent of desert blossoms. More riders approached from the north, Apache horsemen moving with fluid grace, their formal attire indicating the day's significance. Leading them rode Stephen, no longer the prisoner in chains, but Captain Two Bears, officially recognized as liaison between the army and the Apache nations of the territory. The town gathered in the square around the young cedar tree. Some faces showed lingering weariness, others genuine welcome. Judge Ramsey had traveled from Tucson for the occasion, as had Captain Porter and the territorial governor's representative. Quite a change from last spring. Blackwood commented to Dr. Wilson as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Hard to believe there was nearly a war. Instead, we have a treaty, Dr. Wilson mused. The first jointly developed by both sides, from what I understand. Stephen's doing largely, Mrs. Abernathy added, joining them. In the year since the confrontation, she had stepped fully into her role as cultural interpreter, dividing her time between teaching school and facilitating understanding between communities. Though your testimony about the conspiracy certainly helped persuade Washington. The Apache party dismounted, Stephen approaching with the dignity that had impressed Dr. Wilson, even when the warrior lay chained and wounded. Behind him came Black Knife and several tribal elders, including Yellow Blossom. Dr. Wilson, Stephen greeted him formally, before his face softened as he looked down at Pia. Little healer, not so little anymore, she replied with a grin. Standing as tall as possible, always little to me, he countered with rare humor, before turning to the gathered officials. We are ready. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. The official signing of accords establishing protected Apache territory, joint management of mineral resources discovered on shared lands, and formal acknowledgement of past wrongs. The governor's man spoke of a new era of cooperation, while Judge Ramsey emphasized the rule of law, applying equally to all citizens, regardless of origin. When the formal proceedings concluded, Stephen stepped forward, holding a small object wrapped in soft leather. The crowd hushed as he unwrapped it, revealing a silver medallion on a blue ribbon. By authority of President Grant, he announced, his deep voice carrying easily to the assembled crowd, I present this commendation to Pia Wilson, whose courage began the path to justice and peace. Pia's eyes widened as Stephen placed the medallion around her neck, its weight settling alongside the medicine bag and silver cross. The official citation mentioned extraordinary service to the United States, though everyone present knew the full story transcended such formal language. When the applause subsided, Pia stepped forward. I have something too, she said, suddenly shy before the crowd. From her pocket, she withdrew the small package, offering it to Stephen. He unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small cedar seedling, its roots carefully packed in damp cloth, along with the bone whistle he had given her a year before. I kept it safe, she explained, but now I think it should go home with you, to protect the new beginning. Stephen accepted both gifts with solemn appreciation, understanding their significance perhaps better than anyone. The whistle that had called for help in desperate times would now symbolize the ability to call upon allies rather than enemies. As the formal gathering dispersed into a community celebration, Dr. Wilson found himself standing slightly apart, watching his daughter move comfortably between groups, explaining a healing plant to curious townswomen, one moment respectively greeting Apache elders the next. She bridges worlds better than most of us, Mrs. Abernathy observed, joining him. Better than I managed for most of my life, he acknowledged. Though I'm learning, they watched as Stephen helped Pia demonstrate a traditional Apache blessing for the newly planted cedar. The warrior who had once seemed so foreign and threatening now moved through the town with quiet confidence, respected if not fully understood by most of its citizens. Not perfect harmony, Samuel Reed commented realistically as he hobbled up to join them, but a start worth celebrating indeed. Dr. Wilson smiled as Pia ran back toward him, face alight with the simple joy of a child, despite all she had witnessed and accomplished. Papa, Stephen says I can visit the summer gathering of tribes if you agree. Yellow Blossom will teach me about vision plants, and there will be an eagle dance. Looking over her head to where Stephen stood watching them, Dr. Wilson nodded his permission. The Apache's rare smile in response held the promise of continued connection, of bridges being maintained rather than burned. As the spring sun began to set over Copper Springs, casting long shadows from the small cedar tree that would one day grow tall and strong, Wilson realized that the true miracle wasn't just that peace had been established, but that it had begun with the simple, instinctive compassion of a child who saw only a suffering soul where others would have seen an enemy. Some lessons, it seemed, the old could indeed learn from the young, perhaps the most important lesson of all.